Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Doug Bish. I'm a principal at Stantec, formerly Williamsburg Environmental Group. We were acquired back in January. I also have with me Alex Forreste, who's one of our senior engineers, and Glenn Muckley, who's one of our senior engineers, both who've worked on the project. Thank you much to Chris Swan and the Center for Watershed Protection for hosting this. They have a really nice system that allows delivery of these webcasts. And last but certainly not least, we have Lee Epstein with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I believe he's Director of Lands, and he commissioned some of this MS4 support work through a series of mini grants that we'll talk about both in this webcast and the one that's coming up next week. So feel free. I'm not sure I'll be able to pay attention to every question in the chat box if we have a lot of them, but if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we can either circle back and get to them at the end of a section, or we can go ahead and try to address them when we're on the relevant slide. So what we're going to talk about today is just a brief introduction to why are we here, and what were we trying to accomplish, a little background on this tool, or procedures that we've developed for the City of Falls Church through this Chesapeake Bay Foundation mini grant. We'll talk about at least our cursory review of how some of the tracking metrics relate to Bay TMDL activities and special conditions and accountability for some of the TMDL related nutrient reductions. A good component of this towards the end will be some practical advice from Glenn Muckley. He's one of our certified nutrient management planners on nutrient management planning for the City of Falls Church, and what we did to sort of set up a template for them and get their nutrient management for their municipal lands kicked off. And then we can certainly answer any questions that arise during the presentation to the best of our abilities. So why are we really here? Well, Chesapeake Bay, for those of you that may not be in the Bay watersheds, the largest estuary in the United States and one of the largest and most biologically productive in the world. There's been significant federal emphasis on protecting and improving the water quality to the Bay, resulting in some fairly ambitious requirements. Promulgation of a total maximum daily load for the estuary and the associated river segments, which through the has led to a lot of localities grappling with a lot of additional responsibilities and a lot of new changes and a lot of staff demands that historically maybe haven't been there. So with that, if Lee could maybe make a few remarks about CBF and their role in this entire effort.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Lee Epstein. I'm the director of the Lands Program at CBF. And for anyone who doesn't know who we are, and there might be some folks on this webinar who don't, we're the largest and the oldest nonprofit dedicated entirely to restoring the Chesapeake Bay. We've got an education department that takes literally tens of thousands of children and adults into the environment every year and teaches them. We do advocacy at federal, state, and local levels, and we run an active restoration program for oysters and forested buffers along streams and plantings on farms. But given the great need, we've also been trying to help local governments over the last couple of years. So we're very happy to have sponsored this local assistance project, and even more happy with our partnership with Stantec in this effort in Virginia. We've also done some work in Pennsylvania with another consulting group, the Center for Watershed Protection, and they've done terrific work up there. So luckily we've had two really good consultants to help the local governments that have signed on to this. What we see this as is an opportunity to fill in knowledge and process gaps that some municipalities might have for how they can best meet MS4 permit requirements and address some of the planning needs and processes that they've got to go through under their permits. In this particular project, Stantec worked closely with 2 cities in the Commonwealth, with the city of Lynchburg and the city of Falls Church. That, together with their expansive other knowledge, that's what they're bringing to bear today in today's webinar. So overall, we hope that their experience shared today and next Friday, if some of you can join us, can help you. And as Chris said in the beginning of this webinar, this presentation will be made next Friday, will live on the CBF website afterward, along with any materials that Doug references. And that address is www.cbf.org/MS4. And that ought to help you get there. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to someone who really knows something, and that's Doug. Thanks.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. I wanted to give a brief introduction to Stantec. Our business center within Stantec previously was Williamsburg Environmental Group, so we set out contracting with CBF to support some of these MS4 related activities. We're in the process of being fully integrated into Stantec, and now we have a pretty good breadth of resources, more than 13,000 staff in the United States, Canada, and some international. So we're part of our Mid-Atlantic Environmental Services practice. We're doing the same thing we were doing before. It's just a new name, new company name. Same people, same services. So with that done, just to talk a little bit about Virginia's Phase 2 MS4 general permit. It's important because that sets the backdrop for a lot of the record keeping and tracking that is required. The new MS4 general permit became effective in July of 2013, and related to the Chesapeake Bay special condition, which outlines those things that MS4 operators need to do to comply with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL requirements. There's a litany of specific actionable items and program updates that are required that are referenced throughout the permit. The good news is they are staggered. They're not all immediately upon issuance of the permit. Some of them have 12 months, 24-month deadlines, 60-month deadlines for full incorporation. So we'll reference that throughout. So some of the ones that were required within 12 months of receiving coverage included the updates to public education and outreach planning to be consistent with the permit, identification of nutrient management plan locations, and other items, and those relate to some of the tracking tools that we put together for the city of Falls Church. Some longer-term items include full development of a Chesapeake Bay TMDL action plan, establishing how those load reductions will be achieved over 15 years of permit cycles, and that is required within 24 months after permit coverage. Although some of the guidance, the how-to kind of material from the EPA is still under development for some of the less traditional ways of reducing nutrients. And further, while the nutrient management locations need to be identified within 6 months, within the first 12 months, the implementation of those NMPs is required to be fully implemented within 60 months, so 5 years. And annual reporting on the progress of how these goals are being achieved. So you'll see on the left there's some references to the sections contained within the permit. But that's mostly what we're talking about. And we're not talking a whole lot today about nuts and bolts, except for maybe in the nutrient management arena. What we're talking about was a resource issue that the city of Falls Church was experiencing, and that's why they reached out to CBF for assistance. And this is not exclusive to City of Falls Church by any means, but pretty much everyone in the stormwater arena is very busy right now, and particularly municipal staff supporting an MS4 permit. And what you find is fairly universal is it last couple of weeks to a month prior to the MS4 annual report deadline, there's a mad dash or a scramble to obtain all of the necessary information. Falls Church has excellent staff from a variety of departments that are reaching out and performing all of these activities, but the record keeping sometimes is a little lacking because it hasn't been a priority, and normally it's digging through files, paper files at the end of the year to assemble the information. So they expressed the desire to develop standard operating procedures and some simple but useful tracking tool and internal process for the tracking of the information that's relevant to their annual reporting, so that they can check that throughout the year and make sure that information is updated. So the goals, pretty straightforward, is to avoid what you see in this picture, which comes about in the fall of every year when the MS4 annual reports due. Also, one of the challenges that MS4 permittees have is that internal departments and different folks in different roles under different managerial and supervisory structures often have a role in satisfying some of the MS4 objectives and tracking information, and to provide for better coordination and clarifying who is responsible for what, to promote better internal accountability and avoid the scramble and make reporting easier. So it's not really rocket science. It's more just getting the process in place. So our task was to develop standard operating procedures for fulfilling and tracking the various program elements, more specifically to those that are a little looser in nature: public education, outreach, participation, involvement, pollution prevention, good housekeeping, and not the ones where they already have institutionalized or enterprise processes like construction site and post-construction runoff control that's already through a permit vehicle with its own separate databases. So we discussed the method of doing that, of tracking all of this, and we could have done a very elaborate database, but I don't think that's what they were looking for. They wanted a simple process and a simple tool that looked at that. The other ancillary tasks, the last two bullets here, were to try to review, to the extent that the guidance could be interpreted relative to their program metrics, but how some of their non-structural practices should be tracked for TMDL accounting, and also start formulating their strategy for nutrient management planning. So without further ado, we developed a procedure and tracking tool, a series of standard operating procedures that identify the roles, the activities, and what needs to be done. The key strategies, this all links back directly to their MS4 program plan, specifically to each minimum control measure, and then to each BMP under each minimum control measure. There was a series of interviews with the staff that were performing these roles to get a better feel for what they're doing and how the tools could better track it, to identify and quantify those things, those BMPs, and et cetera. A lot of this is redundant. But so what this resulted in, we reviewed and sat down with city staff at length to look at their various minimum control measures, their stormwater websites, the specific milestones or quantities of outreach materials that they were obliged to do, and developed a system to track that. The other thing, a lot of this information was housed on individuals' desktops or in various files spread across the server. And so for ease of administration, Falls Church elected to have their administrative personnel, one administrative personnel be responsible for warehousing all of this information and receiving the updates from all of the staff at different departments, and tracking that completion in a simple spreadsheet. So it's very procedural in nature. we started with the interviews with staff to develop activity log reports for each of these SOPs and each relevant activity that might be undertaken. Formulated a standard operating procedure with very explicit instructional guidance on what needed to be done, both to satisfy the minimum control measures in the program plan, but also to track it. And then that all feeds up to the centralized spreadsheet tracking tool, which, again, isn't terribly sophisticated. So these SOPs and the tracking tool are available. The tracking tool's in Excel format. Feel free to use them or adapt them to your own uses if you want. There's nothing proprietary about any of this. But the tracking and reporting tool specifically is a step-by-step procedure that outlines exactly what to fill in each block of it. It's, I want to say, a 7 or 8 page guidance document that spells out who is responsible for what and what information needs to be populated and when to avoid that end-of-year rush. The SOP lists responsible parties, provides detailed instructions for using the spreadsheet, but it's oriented towards the administrative assistant, who's the one where all of this data is funneling through. And she is responsible for maintaining one master copy of that tracking tool on the server and periodically updating it. So we also developed SOPs for nutrient and habitat management, which they categorize a number of different activities in. It's oriented to the staff that are actually out conducting these activities in the field. And the SOP requires completion of these activity log reports within 1 week of the activity, so the information isn't stale. And it provides instructions, blank forms, and one other thing to promote accountability or more frequent updates is all activities need to be reported and funneled up to DPW administrative staff once a month for input into the centralized tracking tool. So it includes a suggestion for adding a prescribed monthly event to the Outlook calendar to do that, and using a standard email subject line, even if there were no events. But, you know, nutrient and habitat management, MCM, no events this month. So beyond that, there's an activity log for each type of event, both public events, publications, or flyers that may be distributed, and internet content, and those are available if anyone would like to look at them. Further, so this just lists in detail type of event, the location, the responsible party. There's hyperlinks in the tracking tool for the materials that were used, so they can be included in appendices in the annual report, documentation on the number of participants, et cetera, and so forth. How was it advertised? And was there any feedback on the event to better update the program plan more frequently for targeted outreach? So for public education and outreach, you know, some of those are actually go fix it, go do things in the nutrient and habitat management. Publication and outreach overlaps to some extent because there's a lot of citizen and public involvement in the restoration activities. But so it mimics the SOP. But this is more specifically geared towards the folks at Falls Church that are performing the outreach activities. Again, there's an activity log report for each type of activity, including television, public events, public inquiries that need to be documented, and internet content. So again, all of these feed up into this centralized spreadsheet tracking tool, which is not terribly complicated. I may walk through it here in a minute. It's hard to do that through screen captures. So let me, if you'll bear with me for a minute, share my desktop, and then I will bring that spreadsheet up and walk through it a little bit. So let's see. All right, here we go. So here we have their tracking spreadsheet, and it's organized both by minimum control measure and by the associated BMP that needs to be included in the annual report. All of the frequencies, if there's locally distributed publications 4 times a year, are pre-programmed along with what the composition of each of those publications would need to be. In each BMP, there's an excerpt in the notes area for exactly what the program plan requires. So the administrative staff or the staff that are populating this know exactly what their MS4 permit is requiring them to do and what information needs to be tracked, reported, and how are they evaluating the effectiveness of that. Additionally, the date of any specific actions, the responsible party, the location of the content, which is a hyperlink that's linked to their server location where they're going to store all of their annual reporting information, the publication or air date in the case of these, how widely was it distributed, was it public noticed, et cetera. And that carries through for both MCM1, MCM2, MCM3, MCM4, MCM6, and the others are tracked separately through Enterprise System. And additionally, there's tracking for elective activities. The idea of doing this in a spreadsheet instead of some more elegant database type product was that the needs may evolve, their program plan may evolve, their BMPs may evolve, and you want it to be user editable so that they don't have to go procure consulting support every time they want to update the tracking tool. So in any event, I will flip back over and go back to the presentation here. If you'll bear with me. It takes a minute to come up on my screen we discovered earlier, so just please give me a moment. All right, so hopefully everybody can see we're back where we started in the presentation. So nothing really earth-shattering, but it's important, and it's even more important given the Bay TMDL reductions and the need to track those load reductions that are occurring, especially for some of these more non-traditional, non-structural type of management practices. So additionally, we provided a memo. This was just an add-on to the main services that CBF contracted us to do, but of the current street sweeping guidance, their urban tree planting program, their forest buffers and reforestation and wetland restoration and habitat management activities that were all incorporated into the nutrient and habitat management SOP to try and see if there was any current correlation between that and specific load reductions that are creditable to the Bay TMDL. And also just provided recommendations to revisit in the future if that guidance evolves, that the tracking needs to evolve too for accountability. So, observations in terms of reporting and the Bay TMDL reductions, their street sweeping results in 300 tons of sediment typically, and those correlation matrix for nitrogen and phosphorus are included based on the early expert panel research. Also, we just addressed some of the ones that are a little fuzzier right now, public education and outreach, and possible changes to their program in the future. But we didn't, this was a more ancillary task, but it's there if you want to look at what Alex Forreste had compiled in terms of some of the literature that was available. Probably could use some revisiting since the Bay program has been very actively in the process of developing guidance. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that we looked at was, was it possible to credit some of the, practices for public education and outreach towards Chesapeake Bay, crediting. And, one of the things we found was that Chesapeake Bay Program Office has an expert panel oriented around this topic, and they essentially categorized public education into two different categories. One was retail methods or active methods, and the other is wholesale methods or passive methods. The active methods rely more on direct engagement with individual property owners to develop things like nutrient management plans, based on training, direct technical assistance. For example, another example is certification of commercial fertilizer applications or applicators. So these are more direct, interactions with these folks, or active methods, which they do have methods whereby those are credible, but the wholesale methods or the passive methods are more, media-based or social marketing-based, where it's difficult to follow through to see if, behavior change follows. And what we found is that a lot of the activities for the City of Falls Church were tending to fall into that category, the passive methods. So we found it difficult to, attribute credit, nutrient reduction credit to those public education activities. But if there were changes to some of the current practices to convert them from passive to active methods, it may be possible to account for those nutrient reductions from those activities.
And that's, I think, an important point related. This is a tracking tool so that they can submit annual reports more expeditiously, and so everyone knows their roles. But the challenges before us in terms of achieving the Bay TMDL reductions is also a useful milestone to go back and look at our activities, look at what guidance there is, see how our activities could be better directed towards achieving better load reductions. And that feeds right back into what are you tracking and how do you organize these events and what are the procedures for delivering them. So with that, I think that'll conclude the part about tracking. Sorry to belabor that for 26 minutes. Now we'll get into some interesting, and as an ancillary task to this, they have the objective of developing their identifying their sites and establishing a schedule for nutrient management planning. This is a service that, as a consultant, it's not, we're not out developing hundreds or thousands of nutrient management plans in volume, but what we set out to do was sort of develop a template for them, interact with their staff, get the SOP, and get the thing kicked off so that they can then better educate their ground staff on how to carry that forward. The permit specifically states that the operator shall implement turf and landscape nutrient management plans that have been developed by a certified turf and landscape nutrient management planner on all lands owned or operated by the MS4 where those nutrients are applied to a contiguous area greater than 1 acre. And to talk more about nutrient management planning, we have Glenn Muckley, who's our senior engineer, but also a nutrient management planner.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. So, as Doug mentioned, there we go. We do, in Virginia, have recently adopted a certified nutrient management planning process, and that relates directly to some of the requirements of the MS4 general permit. As Doug mentioned and Alex touched on, the identification of the applicable lands is basically that first phase in that first 12 months, or would have concluded this past week. And then it's a phased approach topping out in 2018 to ensure that all the lands owned by those MS4 permittees have certified nutrient management plans covering those acreages. So we'll just talk a little bit about general nutrient management plan certification within Virginia, and some of the baseline requirements of those plans, and then kind of some of the value that we see as it relates directly to the MS4 environment, which we kind of find intriguing. So in Virginia, to craft or write a certified nutrient management plan, you do have to be certified by the state. There are opportunities to go through that process through, or to obtain that certification rather through some formal or education or experience, but more than likely you're going to need to walk through DCR's two separate planning school sessions with DCR and culminating into exam. DCR has actually done a very nice job of putting together a soil science turf production program. It's a 2-day course that really crams in what I would call a better part of a semester of soil science into that 2-day period. And then they go into a 2-day session that really covers the nutrient management plan preparation aspects, for different folks on really what are those components need to be, and then educating some of the what seems to be a lot of the turf and landscape folks on, what are the sensitive areas, BMPs that may be in the environment that we need to be treating a little bit differently than just standardized turf grass or lawns or what have you. And then again, the examination is required. So what is really involved in a nutrient management plan? Again, the basic components, what we're really looking for is what are those primary macronutrients as we as stormwater professionals are interested in. That's really what the core of those plans addresses, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. Other plan components, secondary nutrients and lime, certainly soil pH, those aspects are very important. Those are really the required aspects, and soil testing and things like that I'll talk about a little bit more in detail are very important. So if you just pulled one off the shelf for, say, a park or something, you might see just some basic identification information, the certified planner's information, a narrative just kind of depicting what's going on with the site, basic soils and plans that show the site in relation to various features or buildings and that type of thing. A nutrient application window for the particular type of turf or landscape bed that is required. So it's really species targeted and particularly geographically targeted. So what may happen in Northern Virginia would be different than what happens in the southern or southwestern part of the state. And then we walk through a nutrient application worksheet, which really spells out basic guidelines on how much to apply and when to apply it and in what form. Typically focusing on slow release type products or organic type products. And then soil tests will be included in there. That's really the foundation for the entire plan. These recommendations aren't made, in a vacuum. They're, we walk the site, take representative soil samples, and make sure that those recommendations moving forward are in accordance with what's really required on the plant level. So in terms of Falls Church, we had a really straightforward approach. I think that Doug and Alex have both already touched on, but we really wanted to inventory, just identify those nutrient management plan sites that were eligible or required under the permit conditions. And then we, identified one of those, working with city staff on what do we really want to study as a case study, and develop that template. And then additionally to that, we developed standard operating procedures for how they would go about tracking, certifying, and managing those plans in the future, and those processes and, roles and responsibilities. So again, first step, we utilized their local GIS information, working with county staff, or city staff rather, to identify all the sites under their control that would qualify for, to be required and certified nutrient management planning. And we selected there in the left center, Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, which is actually an interesting property, which we'll talk about a little bit in more detail. Really, this next step is to get out and get an understanding with the folks on the ground who are taking care of things. Doug mentioned we spend a lot of money in the Bay watershed putting nutrients down, and so as stormwater professionals or local officials or even citizens, we'd like to make sure that, since we have to treat things on the back end and pay for addressing those nutrients, we want to make sure there's no real bad actors. So typically we don't really find many, but, of course you can't have guys like this that do over-apply nutrients, but that's really what we're after, is really trying not to over-apply those nutrients. But typically you just want to understand what's going on with that existing operation. What are their limitations, and that includes their budget and their manpower. What type of nutrient applications are they making now? When are they making them? Are there additional cultural practices that they may utilize that makes that, that you need to be aware of? What's going on with the irrigation? What's the nutrient content of that source, and how much are they putting down? really what their historical records are is a huge window, because you don't really want to walk in someplace and tell somebody to change what they're doing. You really want to be able to tweak that program and just make sure they're in compliance with standards and criteria that govern nutrient management planning in Virginia. So part of that kind of right alongside that is a site review. Again, you just really want to understand what are the different uses. In this case, we have some ball fields adjacent to the Thomas Jefferson School. Again, irrigation. Where those management areas are in relation to the sensitive areas. What types of turf grass or other plants are being used, and what's really the maintenance focus. What are the tolerance levels as well? And then there are other considerations that we feel, again, this is kind of over and above what's really required in a standard nutrient management plan, but there might be, schools are a prime location for retrofit opportunities, so we really look at that, and we tried to maybe craft that into the template so that they would, the folks at the city would be aware in future planning efforts. Education opportunities, particularly in this case at the school, and again, really neat. They have some ongoing programs at the school with a few rain gardens and some recent retrofits that they've already done. Really neat program, and maybe even some opportunities to expand it, but really a good model. Just a quick overview of the site. This is kind of thing that we, just a real basic graphic showing the site, its location in relation to trips run and its RPA there in the red dashed line. The location of soil borings in the red dots with the labels next to them. The rain gardens there around the school areas and the entrance to the parking lot, and then these new biofilters that were created. Again, I want to just make sure, in this case, we've got a management company that the city employs to oversee the facility. Pretty limited nutrient inputs, but just make them aware of what the requirements are around those facilities, so they're operating in accordance with the plan. Again, soil testing is a huge part of the plan and development of the recommendations. You want to take good, appropriate representative samples of where you're actually performing those maintenance activities, and then they need to be done by an approved lab, and the standards and criteria dictate exactly what labs can do what. So, and again, what are the extra opportunities? Maybe not really so much part of the standardized plan, but kids are out there enjoying the playground. They're enjoying the ball fields. Portion of that area is in the RPA. So in addition to some of their ongoing education that benefits, maybe some signage, kind of more of a passive activity like Alex mentioned, but still some opportunities there to encourage, just a cognizance on the kids' behalf, the next generation of what's really happening with their environment around them. Existing BMPs, and like I said, there's signage out there now, really gets the kids focused on what's going on. And then, again, retrofit opportunities. We just try to be on the lookout for maybe highlight those in a plan so that maybe a permittee, maybe rolls that into future thinking. In addition to the earlier tracking tools for the minimum control measures, we provided even probably a much more simplified spreadsheet tool just to keep an eye on these plans as they progress from year 1 to year 2 and so on. Just highlights really what are the facilities, where are they at, what kind of acreages are we talking about, has the plan been developed or not, and based on the staff's review, what are the priority facilities for the coming year, when are you targeting to complete those by so that you're in accordance with your year-over-year goals. File paths, as Doug noted, with linkable to the system, just general information. And then as an overview of just to better understand how they'll move forward, very simplified standard operating procedure just to develop an understanding of whose roles or what's getting done, what facilities need to be certified in the future, any facility changes, if there were some new facilities perhaps brought online, or there was management changes to those facilities, and just to identify generally any action required in the coming months. Say three plans need to be crafted in the future. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Doug. And
Thank you, Glenn. Yep. Again, feel free to contact any of our presenters if you want additional information on the certification process. We've provided all of the deliverables from this on this FTP link, but in case you can't write very fast, Lee and CBF are going to post those on a website where they'll remain. This one expires next week, but you feel free to utilize them. Take the spreadsheet if you feel it's useful, adapt it to your own purposes, or glean whatever lessons from it that you can. But I think one of the common themes, a lot of these areas overlap. As Glenn said, if you're out beating feet and getting out to look at your school sites or your turf-intensive uses, that's also an opportunity to help inventory retrofits. If you're doing habitat and restoration activities, and you can engage the public, that's killing two birds with one stone. So particularly with strapped resources, if you can, encourage your staff and your consultants to try and be a force multiplier for helping you achieve your program objectives. So with that, I haven't seen any questions in the status bar here unless I am missing them. But our contact information is right here, and we'll field any questions if anyone has any. I hope we haven't been talking to ourselves for 40 minutes. Okay, I see a couple coming through, a couple folks typing. So. Sure. I'll go back to the last slide. So. Again, Lee's going to email this out to everyone, or email the CBF webpage once all these materials and this webcast with audio have been recorded and posted. So he's going to post that to a website that'll last longer. But if you need,
yeah, we'll have it up on again. It'll be www.cbf.org/ms4. And that's our webinar page. We've already got some of the webinars that we've presented up in Pennsylvania on that page, so you might even find some of those materials interesting and useful. So feel free to take a look. But we will, I think, takes about a week or so after these presentations to get everything up on our website, and we'll have all these materials on there.
Let's see a couple of folks typing. Glenn, this is a good one for Glenn. Is there a centralized list of certified nutrient management planners for hire?
there is actually. I believe, I don't have the exact address, but I believe if you go to the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation website, you can find a comprehensive list of the nutrient management planners that are certified to date, and all their contact information.
All right, see a couple of more folks typing. Okay.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, we'll be here for a few minutes taking questions, but thank you all for joining us. Will some of the tracking templates mentioned earlier be posted on the CBF website? Yes, all of the deliverables from this fall's church effort will be posted on the website, and next week's webcast we'll be talking about the anatomy of a public outreach plan that was done for the city of Lynchburg. We'll have our marketing coordinator helping with that, because a lot of it involves social marketing and developing of marketing materials to get the message out. So next week we'll do that webcast, and that information similarly will be posted and made available on the CBF website. So about a week out per lead. So. right. Well, we'll stick around in case there's more questions, but thank you all very much for joining us. Thanks very much to Lee and the CBF gang for reaching out and helping municipalities to achieve this, both financially and with technical resources. Thanks to the center for really helping with all of this, and also for the excellent work they do throughout the country. And thanks to Jason Widstrom and the folks at City of Falls Church for working with us on this. I don't know if any of them are here, but they have a really top-notch program. So appreciate it. I'll put our contact information up in case any of you want to email us. And this will be available. The presentation will also be available on the CBF website. Thank you.